Close your door over there. Tosh, you got to get here early. Good morning and welcome to Openline Online, Sunday, June 16th, 2019, Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to you all out there. And we are all here except for one member. Neither Khan is off today. And I'll go around the room and introduce the crew with us. I'll start over to my far right. Attorney Bob Pickett, good morning. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you very much.
Happy Father's Day, brother.
I appreciate the opportunity to celebrate Father's Day with our audience.
Sounds great. Brother Larry Ham.
Happy Father's Day, and happy Father's Day to everybody in our listening and viewing audience, to all the dads and guys that are like dads.
That's right. Brother Achille Buchanan. Good
Happy
morning.
Father's Day, all the brothers here and all you dads out there. And I want to give a special shout out to the brothers, the fathers of class of 71 and 72 of Malcolm X Shabazz High School. I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my brothers. We've been doing that meeting every Father's Day for the last 2 decades now. And I also want to give a shout out to the heavens, to 4 brothers from the class of 72, Wayne Ross, Andre Williams, William Avant, and brother who was my best friend, close to my heart, still is, George Bird. These brothers are probably having Southern fried chicken up in the universe, and we're going to meet them at the same time. We're going to meet with them later on. So all the brothers of 71, 72, happy Father's Day.
Oh, Roscoe's is up there.
Yes,
There
yes,
you
or
go.
Amy
Roscoe's
Ruth's.
Chicken and waffle. Jamie Harris, good morning. Happy Father's Day, my
Good
brother.
morning. Happy Father's Day to all the
Happy Father's
brothers
Day.
here. Happy Father's Day to all the viewers. And also, I just want to acknowledge all the sisters, all the wonderful women who have helped make us the men that we are and who continue to stand by us, not behind us, but by us.
My brother, Bobby Childs, good morning. Happy Father's Day.
Good morning. Happy Father's Day to everyone out there. And remember, it takes a household to raise a family. So fathers, do your part. Don't leave it on to the mothers. And mothers, don't give the fathers such a hard time. We ain't that bright sometimes. So.
And sitting in for Sister Nitha Khan is Open Line's newest host, Jennifer Jones Austin. Good morning, Sister Jennifer.
Good morning and happy
Good
Father's
morning.
Day to all of you and to all of the viewers, and especially my husband, Sean Austin, who is a consummate dad. He's just what my children need and just what I needed for a father for my
There you
kids.
go.
Oh, that's nice.
So, we're on Father's Day, so let's just kick it around a little bit here real quick on Father's Day before we get into some of the issues that are in the news. What makes a good father? Why is it important of being a good father? Start with Brother Jamie Harris.
I think it's, values first and foremost. But I would say being present, being active, and being engaged. You have to be more than a provider. It just can't be where you're providing financial support and assistance. You have to be present, active, because, as having 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, I take pride in trying to be part of every aspect of their life. And you learn to give them their space, but you're always there. And the love, and that word is powerful. I think sometimes that word is really, it's thrown out there, but, it's energy, it's spiritual, the love and the connection that you have, even if you're not, as they get older, in that same space, it's still like you're inseparable. And so I just think that, just being there and maintaining that spiritual connection, and again, being present and engaged and active is so critical.
Bobby?
Yeah, I echo what my brother says there, right? It comes down to those values and being, we use that term role model, right? But it truly is helping them be the best they can be and putting aside your pride, your ego, to really connect with that individual to actually help them shape their view of the world, not your view of the world that you want them to do. And it's funny, right? This week, my 11-year-old, she graduated from 5th grade. So I'm sitting there, thank you. I'm sitting there, doing what I do, right? Because I'm always trying to get her to be embarrassed at things. It's just the way I am. But as I'm watching these kids run around, the black kids playing with the white kids, the Indian kids, and they're just all just like having fun. And I'm saying to myself, at what point in their lives do they start to demonstrate this racism that's out there, right? Because they're not born with that. Mm-hmm. And so when I see parents who say some of the things that they say in public, and kids, as we know at that early age, they will just absorb that and think it's the norm. So for fathers and mothers, it's raise them to be better than it was when you were there, right? So to me, it starts with those values.
Excellent point. Sister Jennifer.
So, I'm going to issue a disclaimer, not being a father and not having the opportunity to one day be a father. I'm just going to talk from the experience of having been fathered and watching my husband and my brother and other men close in my life, how they have fathered. What I will tell you is now at 50 years of age, I know that it was my father's unconditional love, my father's belief in me, regardless of whether I was a woman or a person of color. Those were actually attributes and, positives that, that he just poured into. But essentially having a dad who believed in me, and the sky was the limit, and who never hesitated to let me know how proud he was of me, and who, when he did not think I was doing what was in my what was good for me, he counseled me, and he modeled for me, and he demonstrated for me what was the better way to go. He didn't pounce on me. He didn't, he didn't smack me around. He didn't belittle me. He didn't demean me. He lifted me up at every turn. The material things are insignificant, right? It's the love and the care and the concern that you show and the belief that you show in your children that makes all the difference.
Sounds good. Bob Pickett.
Yeah, so, and I echo all that you've said. I have two wonderful daughters, Samantha Taylor Pickett and Sarah Pickett. All my girls' names begin with S's. S. I echo what Bobby has said, and raising children is not easy, but it's an obligation that we have to undertake and provide guidance to them. Both my girls have, with my guidance and their mother's guidance, have gone on to successfully graduate from college and undertake graduate school / law school. I am very proud of them, and I tell them every time I talk to them, including my granddaughter, by the way. There's another girl. She calls
Starts
me,
with S, Skylar.
That's right. That's
Superstars.
Right.
All start with S.
Yes,
Superstars.
Yes, and she calls me Pop, and looks forward to getting my advice, and the fact that I'm there for her, I think is critical and important. But I think that it's important for fathers to be fathers and not to stand back and just watch. You got to get in there and give advice, love them, discipline them as well. But ultimately, being a father, I think, is one of the most important responsibilities any father can have in raising that next generation.
Sounds good. Brother Larry Ham.
Well, I want to second everything that everybody is. Nothing has been said that I could possibly disagree with. I was just trying to think of what I could possibly say that could add to it. I think one of the important things, it almost goes without saying that fathers have to love their children. But I think another important thing is that fathers have to have patience. Because a lot of times, I mean, we're all conditioned by society. The roles that society prescribed for us, the masculinity, which is the burden that we have to bear. And sometimes I think the prescribed roles that we have drive us to behave in a way that may not be the best way. You know, truthfully, I think most people, when they think of father, think of an authority figure. And sometimes I think a lot of men, in an effort to exercise their authority, don't really do it in a good way. They do it in a way that is more like force than by guidance. And I think that gets us into trouble sometimes. You know, that's why the Bible tells us to be patient with our children, because, you know, we think our children should behave in a certain way, and when the children don't, there's going to be argument. And it's those points, you know. It's getting in arguments with your children, getting an argument with their mother or your spouse, and it's at those critical moments that I think patience becomes important, and being a good listener becomes important. And I absolutely agree that the material thing is overvalued, but we also cannot eliminate it. We live in a capitalist society, and the prescribed role of a father in the kind of society that we live in demands that we do certain material things. And while we profess to say those things are not important, when those things are not done, then conflict comes through the door.
There's a difference between basics. I'm talking about beyond the basics. When we think we have to, you know, give our kids the moon, we have to give them trips, we have to give them excess. We don't have to do that.
But even in a capitalist society, the basics become very difficult for some people.
I agree.
If you don't have a job,
we agree.
You can't do for your children
Agreed.
those basic things. And, you know, we're all, I better shut up before the bell comes on.
I'm ringing, Brother Keely.
I concur with everything that everyone here has said, and I want to tell all of you how moved I was just now listening to all of you. My father and mother divorced when I was 5 years old, and so I did not have a dad in my home. And in a world of narcissism, where it's easy to become very screwed up because you don't have a father or a mother there with you to idealize and then healthily separate from, so you can live in the world as a healthy individual. Not having a father scared the hell out of me when I thought about being a dad. But I tell you, the moment my son was born, my son Mason Lloyd was born, everything changed for me. I knew exactly what my role was. Not that I did it well. I made mistakes. But I wasn't afraid of the word father. And then later, 6 years later, when I had my daughter, Camille, oh my God. being a dad is the most difficult thing a man can do. Being a mother, I would assume, and I looked at the tutelage of my mother. Being a mom is the hardest thing any woman could do. I resonate with what you said about racism and what we teach our children, because it is taught. And I'm reminded about that famous song from South Pacific, "You have to be carefully taught." You have to be carefully taught. And if whatever mistakes I made, Mason and Camille, whatever mistakes I made, trying to be the best father I could be to you both, I hope that the two of you, when I'm gone, could never say, my dad didn't stand up for what was right. My dad was a warrior for social justice. He was a man of integrity. He made mistakes, but whatever mistakes he made, he did it in the service of serving truth and social justice. And I think if men generally, and black men in particular, and men of color, can live a life of character and integrity, I think that's the best example and precept we can give to our children.
So we have a comment.
Before we go to the comments, let me just add my piece first. Just to round up and appreciate everything that was said. For me, being a father was fun. You know, I think Bobby Childs here knew me before I became a father. And we had fun on that softball field, and I'm glad that my knees and back is able to hold up. We still go out there and play ball. That's what my uniform. We got a 2:30 game today. But you know, a lot of times we put our best foot forward. But I'm going to give you something that, and I don't want to paint my parents, but I'm going to give it to you real. When I was young, you talk about being in the 4th and 5th grade. My parents were together. They come out of previous relationships. My mother had 1 child and my father had 2. And I was the only child between my mother and father. My mother was an alcoholic. And my mother wasn't in the closet alcoholic. My mother drank. And when she drank, she came outside. And she showed her backside. Still love my mother. The reason why I bring that up, my father worked. He worked 2 jobs. Sometimes he had to come home. He had to deal with me, to take care of me, and then he had to also deal with my mother. I thanked him as I got older to understand that he could have left. He could have left, but he stayed. He stayed there.
Were you the oldest?
No, I was the last. I was the youngest because I was the last one between them two. They had previous relationships and children before me. So I was the baby and the only one between them. So it was tough on my father to work 2 jobs, to deal with all this, not knowing when he came home what state my mother would be in, if dinner would be cooked, or if he had to come home and cook dinner. And I saw all of this, and I saw the struggles. Both my parents were from the South. And a lot of times there were arguments, and sometimes they, you know, like some of the rap records say, there's going to be some furniture being turned over. You know, they fought. And these are the things that I saw. But out of that, through their love, through my father and my mother's love, I was able to see my mother kick alcohol on her own. Never went to triple A. You never went to the, exactly, never went to AA. And she bragged about her liver, kidneys being intact. And both my parents got a chance to see, and I was one of the first in the family to graduate. And when I say I'm not talking just about me, I'm talking about my family, one of the first to graduate college. And I say this to say that. I say that to say this. It resonated there for me. Because as I said this morning, and a lot of you know that I have a wife who has sickle cell anemia. And When I got with my wife, my mother was still living. My father had passed. And my aunt asked me, is that something that you want to take on? And I got offended at first, but I understood what my aunt was saying. My aunt was basically saying, you come out of a situation where your mother and father had health challenges and you had to deal with them. Now you deal with someone that you don't know what the outcome will be. You don't know if she will live till tomorrow. That was 30 years ago. We planned for children. My wife had numerous miscarriages. We got one time to 5.5 months and the baby just died. So couldn't perform a D&C or D&E. For those that know, she had to birth a dead baby. So out of all that, I remember my father being there, and I had to be there. I wasn't going anywhere through those challenges. When we had our first daughter, Fatia Yasmin in 92, and then Rakaya Janae in 96, I was the happiest man alive. And I knew my responsibility of being there. And did I have challenges? Of course I had challenges, especially when a mom's the nurturer of the children. You're talking about somebody who breastfed, and I used to sleep on the hospital floor when my wife would be in the emergency room so she could breastfeed the first child. We did things a little differently for our second child. But I looked at the example of my father and what he did. And I just didn't limit it to my family. I extended to my other cousins, my little cousins. I talked to them about sex, condoms, and all these things. Trying to be the best role model that I could be. And taking it to the schools and speaking to the kids and being part of the PTA and all of this. My father made me the man that I am today. And yes, women can raise men. There's certain things that maybe women cannot teach male children in the sense of certain things that they get from a man. And I commend those that do it singularly. And I understand what a single mother has to do because at times I had to do it by myself only because my wife was sick. So I applaud all men on this Father's Day. I applaud all men that do the right thing. I watched on social media real quickly yesterday how something went around about being Mr. Mom and how some women were bashing men that did not stand up. There are a lot of individuals that are parents that do not stand up. But on days like this, we applaud those that stand up. We take a moment to listen to those stories because there's so many excellent stories. And I'm just glad that we here as brothers and sister, that we could talk about this when Mother's Day's there and Father's Day's there and give the proper time to talk about fathers, especially as black men. Some comments there, Brother Bobby?
So a couple, Edward Latson, and thank you again for all of you out there who have found us on YouTube. I know we've been bouncing around the last few weeks, Facebook and YouTube, but Edward Latson, to the point Jennifer and Larry had made earlier, he said being a parent doesn't make you perfect, but it gives you the ability to learn from your errors and teach those errors to your children. He also said it's important in the material world that parents be parents and not wallets for their children.
Excellent point. Excellent.
You know, I just want to say, and to quote or paraphrase Khalil Gibran in the moving book The Prophet, our children don't become us, we become our children. And when you think about it, we probably learn more from our children than they learn from us.
If you're open mind, yes. Yeah. I agree with that.
I just want to commend all the fathers, whether they're doing a good job or not. I especially want to hold up the fathers who feel they're not doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not doing a good job, try to find help. Don't succumb to depression or despair.
Or anger.
Mm-hmm.
Try to find help. You know, a doctor comes not to those who are well. He comes to those who are sick. And I think, you know, those dads that may not be there as much as they need to be there, they need our support too. Those dads that can't provide as much, you know, I mean, again, this material thing is something that really requires discussion, because we say it's not important, but do you know how many black fathers are locked up for not providing child support?
Many.
Do you know how that impacts a family? Like, it's so strange. They'll lock someone up for not providing child support, but in the process of locking people up, they lose their job, and then they have no opportunity to provide child support.
Well, that's a big issue in the court system, Larry. You have brothers who, particularly in Bronx, where the court system is so backed up, they have to continue to go to court for child support cases, take off from work, ultimately lose their jobs, and then don't have support. And so that story has been well documented and chronicled.
I think I have to keep on clarifying this. There's a difference between materialism and providing for your children's needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I talk about material things, I'm not talking about basic child support, things that help your children to grow and mature. I'm not talking about food, transportation, taking care of education expenses. I'm talking about the excess. To be a good dad, you don't have to provide for your child, the Lexus, or you don't have to.
The $300 Jordans,
You
exactly.
don't have to do that. That's what I'm
the
talking about.
iPhone 10.
Right.
Exactly.
When you're 8 years old.
But I think what Adimu was alluding to is that, one, we live, as you say, in a capitalist society, and we live in a racist society, and we know that men of color, and particularly black men, their manhood, their quote-unquote worth, self-worth, is all tied up in just not a psychic sense of who you are and are you of value, but the material. So we have a society that's racist and capitalistic, that removes black men and men of color from their families. You're not talking about the material, you're talking about emotional sustenance. But if you remove a man who, because of racism, can't get a job. Oh, I know you are.
Yeah.
I know, I'm agreeing with you. But can't get a job, or a job that can pay a living wage.
Agreed.
And life is life. People argue, people separate. The state then intercedes, right, and then blames men simply for situations that they may not have any control over, doubly demonize them, lock them up, separate them from their families, and so both the children and society, the village, continues to get broken up by a system.
Right, and can we just add, and I'm going to say this as a woman, right? Can we just add that we as women have to be careful not to add to that?
I agree.
Absolutely.
Right? I remember when my children were born, and other friends of mine were having their children, getting into discussions about what's my role versus what's my husband's role, and it was like the basics. And I mean, I had friends who would say, no, they can't take my daughters shopping, or they can't do that. The men shouldn't be doing the hair, and I'm responsible for making my child's education decisions. And what I saw was friends literally pushing the men, the fathers, away, like relegating them to kind of like what they considered the less significant nurturing responsibilities. And we as women, regardless of the relationship status, regardless of whether you are with the father of your children or not, you have to allow that relationship to develop.
Yes.
Even if the man is imperfect.
Yes.
We all are imperfect.
We all
but
are.
even if all of his imperfections are ever present, your child still needs a relationship with that individual, because we see too many young men, young women, older men, older women walking around this world all jacked up because they did not have a basic relationship. Even if that father was imperfect,
But Jennifer,
they did not have a basic
I just want to jump in here real quick and throw this here out. And I respect what you say about those men, and if they need help that have not been good fathers, you reach out and try to get that help. I agree with that. But I call a spade a spade. I growing up and being doing right is a choice at times, unless you're in a gang or you being forced to do things. I would watch a lot of young kids. Bobby and Jamie, we look back at our childhood, and I guess your same thing with you, is that our childhood, we did a lot of things that children did. The young folks that came after us, and I'm not beating up on the younger generation, but what I'm saying is that I didn't see as many kids playing in the street or participating on teams. I didn't see that. I started to see young men hanging around, some young men, black young men, Latino young men, hanging around stores, not going to school, not doing what was right, where I would watch some of the females go to school and this, that, and other. And then you like 10 and 15 and 20 years down the road, then you hear the women say, well, there's no good men. Not that, the ratio of women is more women to men out there. But where do we put the blame on those individuals, those males that had an opportunity to go to school? I'm not talking about we're racism, because I had a choice. I know my parents would put their foot in my backside, but I still had a choice. What about those that had that choice and made the wrong choice and then become a menace to society? What about them?
Yeah,
Who takes the blame
I
for
know
that?
And well, clearly, I think you answered the question. It's inferred in your question. If you know when you're doing wrong or right, and we're not talking about men who are totally irresponsible. I don't hang out with men who are not fathers to their children. I don't know them. I don't want to know them. So I agree with you, but we're not really talking about...
But I brought it up to bring that up, to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, how do we start to reach those individuals that are not doing the job and they want to blame everybody else but themselves?
But to go back what Larry,
So-
Larry and Jennifer said, these cultural norms that ascribe these defined roles has created this imbalance in many ways.
It helped
and
you, yeah.
It helped to. And let me just say this, not to digress. I know that some of you mentioned that your parents were divorced. Sometimes adults have a tendency to use children as pawns.
Correct.
And their issues. And I know some good brothers want to be a part of their children's lives, but yet, the women are
They're not
kind of
allowed
using
to.
that and have weaponized that. And so sisters and brothers, I say to you, don't do that. Allow the mother to be a mother and be a part of the child's life, and allow the fathers to be fathers. You guys have to always do what's best for the children.
So I
I-
just want to jump in. So we got Audie Autumn and Edward Latson joining in the conversation. So Audie says, yep, gender roles need to stop. And Edward Latson, really, the person who does the best hair should do the kids' hair, and the better cook should make the dinner. Gender should not define that.
There you go.
I want to say...
I just got a countdown. We have 20 minutes because we're not going over.
I just want to say, as I said before, my parents were divorced when I was 5. My mother never badmouthed my dad. She didn't have to. She didn't have to. He was who he was. I mean, I love my dad. My mom and dad are both gone now. But she didn't have to badmouth him. His behavior, his absence, his presence spoke for themselves. So we have to have, my mom had the faith in our ability to see clearly who was doing what and who was not doing what. So you don't have to badmouth mom or dad, brothers and sisters. Let their behavior, let their actions speak for themselves.
I just want to add.
We got to go on to some.
I just want to add real quick that studies show that economic issues are the major causes of divorce in the United States.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true.
Okay,
All right, let's get to some.
would you share with the audience? Your father was a very famous musician.
my uncle was.
Okay.
My father
Right.
was not as well known as my uncle. My father was a jazz bassist, Lloyd Buchanan, and I'm very much like him, even though I didn't live with him most of my life. And my mom fell in love with a jazz musician.
There you go.
And you know, the life of a musician and a jazz musician
Right.
during the 50s is
Right.
Interesting.
yeah.
Very. All right, a couple of top stories this week. Let's start off here locally. 5 Bronx gangbangers were convicted of a first-degree murder this past Friday for the butchering of the innocent 15-year-old aspiring cop to be a young police officer, Lissandro Jr. Guzman Feliz. Bronx jury deliberated for just 8 hours over 2 days before convicting these 5 gang members for first-degree murder, second-degree murder, conspiracy, and gang assault. Your thoughts? Jamie?
Just horrific. Some of my students actually knew Junior, lived on the same block as Junior, and it's horrific. It was senseless. It was something that I think is cautionary, for young people, those who are part of the gangs. In this case, it was the Trinitarios, and you get involved, as you said, Fatine, with people and acts and actions that will change the course of not just your life, but the lives of so many others. And so I just, still pray for the family, still pray for all those that were close to Junior, and, pray for the brothers who committed this act, that they can change their lives and hopefully speak to other young brothers who are thinking about and who are part of gangs.
Yeah, I mean, it's tragic on so many ends. That young a life taken senselessly, mistaken identity. These gangbangers thought he was someone else, and they killed him in a brutal way in public. And we started off talking about fathers. I resort back to where were the parents in there, right? To have their children, just at such an early age deviate from what's right and wrong. I grew up in Harlem, right? I'm stepping over, people who are overdosing, the Black Spades and all these gangs were in there, right? But my parents instilled in me what's right and wrong. And so when I see things like that, I come back to what went wrong in that household for these young teenagers to do this horrific act out there.
And Fatine, let me also say this. Remember, this all began with the social media post. And as great as social media is, it can also be detrimental. And so we have to just, also talk to our kids about the use of social media, what you see on social media, and know that all of that you see and much of what you see is not reality, and it's not actually what's taking place.
These are the stresses that some of the young folks, when we did the mental health, the challenges of mental health, when we brought in on the on-air show on Openline, we had the young lady that you introduced us to, Sister Jennifer, who was 26 years old and dealing with issues that deals with social media and young folks. How do the young folks cope? And like Jamie said, where were the parents and the involvement? Because like you said, this was a machete. They butchered this young man. Butchered.
One of the things that through the years as I've worked on issues concerning young persons, everything from lack of quality education and lack of mental health supports to, the way that our justice system has, has worked with or not worked with in positive ways with young people. Until we had raised the age and changed the age of criminal adult liability to 18 instead of 16, the housing of young persons for minor infractions with adults and then introducing them to the justice system. as I've worked through the years, one of the things that I've heard a lot about is that our children are now, and this is in part because of social media and materialism and capitalism, all that, coupled with all the hurts and the pains that they feel from the over-incarceration of our communities and the loss of fathers and male figures and what have you. There's this sense of hopelessness. There's this sense of there's no tomorrow. There's this sense of no belonging. There's this sense of being, excluded and disengaged and disconnected. And so they aren't thinking about their lives 15 and 20 years out. They're not aspiring to something greater than what they have because they don't think it's within reach. And so that sometimes they join these gangs to be a part of a community where they think they get status, where they think that they get power. And so they engage in these meaningless activities, believing that, if I get caught out there, if I die, well, at least I go down having done something. I mean, we even saw that when these young men were convicted, that one of them was, he said in Trinitario slang, until death, like, yeah, we did this thing, right? No remorse because they don't have a sense of the future. And the question is, how do we as community help to reinstill that sense of community in tomorrow?
I think it is a form of tribalism. It's also misplaced allegiance. But I would push back on where were the parents, again, I say it again and again, we all have agency. And we know that taking a life fundamentally is wrong.
What do you mean? What do you mean, real, briefly, pushing back on where were the parents?
I want to push back on the notion that because we're placing blame on other people as opposed to individuals taking individual responsibility for the actions that they commit. I don't care if your mom is alcoholic. You know what's right and wrong. I don't care if my parents were divorced. I know what's right and wrong.
But just saying like that's inherent. It's not necessarily inherent. On Father's Day, we talk about that. A lot of that behavior has to be taught.
Yeah, I mean,
many
let me just
things
say,
are taught, but many other things, many deep. Taking a life.
But here's the
no
deal.
one,
I'm
no
just
one
gonna
has to.
push back
No
on
one
you.
has to. No one had to
right, but that's-
teach. Wait.
No,
No
but
one
you-
had to teach me that
But you-
hurting someone willfully is wrong.
But I still don't-
But you may have grown up in a community and a culture where that was just a norm.
Right.
I'm just going to tell you that.
That's what I was saying. That's when I mentioned tribalism.
Right, and what
misplaced tribalism, because on a global, on a macro scale, that kind of violence is what Dr. King talked about. One of the evils of a society, militarism. The notion that violence can be an answer for something.
Right.
But
but-
how do you push back on the
let's
parents?
take an example of a family, of a young person who grows, and this is it's all well documented. A child who grows up in a house with domestic violence is more likely to engage in
don't disagree
domestic
with
violence.
that.
A child who grows up in a house with child abuse is more likely to abuse his or her child. A child who grows up in a household with parents who are obese is more likely to become obese. Let me finish.
That's
let me
genetic.
finish.
That's genetic.
No, it's not just
What,
genetic.
obesity?
No,
Whether-
no, it's not just genetic.
Genetic.
It's your eating habits that can contribute to
Yes,
that. And the point
but
that
it's
I'm
also-
making is it becomes normalized behavior. Dysfunctionality, it can be normalized in different environments.
That's
and if you grow up in an environment,
Yep.
we see it with gangs in other societies, not just New
That's why
America.
I don't
but
agree
if
with
you
the
grow
pushback.
up where life is not considered precious,
Absolutely.
and the taking of the life is considered
That's
like
what I
power,
just suggested.
Right, but the point that
But you-
I'm
but
making
you said
is
that you push back
that
on the
becomes
parents.
normalized behavior,
I
and it's
push
not
back
just
on the notion
self-agency.
Yep.
that those boys shouldn't take responsibility for what they did. But that's what I'm saying. In the final analysis,
to.
in the final analysis,
We agree.
May I? In the final analysis, the parents weren't tried.
I'm not-
and
right.
Let me finish. Weren't tried and convicted. Those boys were.
I understand
I'm
that.
not suggesting that there aren't societal issues that led to it. I am not suggesting that they had wonderful parents. But we do know that there are human beings who have wonderful parents who end up doing horrific
That's
things.
correct.
No
That's
question,
correct.
but we can't but we can't minimize pathology.
Exactly.
We cannot
That's
minimize
why I
pathology.
know
minimize it,
pushback,
but
it
we
gives
can't
the
minimize
connotation
agency.
of
Well-
Finally, you are the agent of your behavior. I am not saying that society and individuals, of course, if I'm a father and my child does something wrong, I'm going to look in the mirror and say, what did I do wrong?
I hope that the parents find some solace in that some of those who were involved in this were found guilty and go to jail, because they should. Whatever the maximum penalty of the law allows, I'm sure they've already.
Do any of those parents? And we have to move on. But did any of those parents of those kids? Because I'm
Wait,
not
can-
in the Bronx.
wait,
But
can I
did any
finish?
of those? Let me just say this: did any of those parents, or that their kids were involved in this, come out and make a statement that we were sorry that our child was involved? We raised our children better than this.
If they didn't, they should have. If they didn't, they should have. But that's
Yeah,
not
but
the.
I'm trying
But
to-
the
but
point.
they should
But
have.
let me.
Saying
But
that
let me.
they
But let me.
they should have.
But let me make.
I don't disagree
Can I
with
make
that.
my point? Can I make my point? That this is happening every day in America. This is not an isolated incident. And that the truth of the matter is that we actually live in one of the most violent societies
of course.
on the face of the
this
planet
planet
Earth. Just gun violence alone, just gun violence, 40,000 people a year are killed in America. That's not even stabbing violence. That's just gun violence. More people die a year than have died in the 18 years, more soldiers than have died in the 18 years that we unjustly occupied Iraq. That's crazy. We live in a violent, very violent society. So, yes, individual agency has a role. Yes, the parents have a role. But obviously, something else is going on here. That we have this horrendous, and if you just measure the United States against the 30 other industrialized nations on the planet, we are the worst. We're the worst. None of them are more violent than we are. So something else is going on here.
Well, let's talk about violence here. Last Thursday, there was a report independent report that came out about a slain California rapper. The report release was about 6 police officers which fired 55 times at this 20-year-old by the name of Willie McCoy in the span of 3.5 seconds. Let that resonate right there. 55 times at 20-year-old Willie McCoy in the span of 3.5 seconds.
In Vallejo, California.
Yes. And this independent report said that the police act reasonably.
So, this story here, right? So he's in the parking lot of a drive-through fast food restaurant, and he is asleep. And so they get a call from the restaurant, the establishment, saying there's a person sitting in the car. We don't know what's going on. So the police show up. He's still partially asleep. They start yelling. They say, "Let's see your hands." He's waking up, and they believe they were at a threat. 6 of them surrounding someone asleep in their car, and they just unload on him. And, we hear the standard response. It was justified. It was reasonable. And so when I hear those, again, and we've talked about this numerous times, something is wrong with the training that officers have. Because if you continue to say, according to the way they were trained is justified, then the way they're trained is wrong. There is no reason why someone who falls asleep in their car, no threat to anyone, Matter of fact, probably sleeping in the car so they wouldn't be a threat on the road driving, and they get hit with 55 shots in less than 4 seconds, and you're saying the training is right? That's wrong.
You know, to go back to your inflection and Fateen's inflection, I think we need to let that sink in. 55 shots in 3.5 seconds. So it speaks to what Larry and Jennifer said earlier. This is becoming normalized behavior. When we hear about school shootings, you know, and I go back to Columbine, we were stunned. I mean, it was shocking. And I mean, the entire country couldn't grasp the magnitude of what took place. Now we hear there's a school shooting, and it's so unfortunate. You know, I think we're all moved by it, but it's like, you know, it's become the norm. And so, as Larry said, that there is something to say about the society that we live in.
288 school shootings this year so far. Wow. 288. Just yesterday, was it Friday? They busted a guy in New Jersey, bought 130 rounds of ammunition. He was planning to do something really terrible in, I think it was Westfield. Was that Westfield?
Yeah.
Westfield, New Jersey.
I think we should. America is a violent society. America is a racist society, and it's also a capitalist society in which human life can be commodified and minimized. School shootings are horrific, but police murder is state-sanctioned terrorism, and I think we need to make distinctions about the kinds of violence and why they happen. My position is the police are being given license to kill people of color. And until my position, the police should be like those in England. They shouldn't have guns. They should. Now I know that's a hyper.
I get it, right.
That's hyper.
I'm
Listen,
not gonna respond.
but wait a minute. But there are too many black men and women and boys and girls being killed by officers of the police.
But white men are not.
I am
white men are not. So
I am saying that state-sanctioned terrorism has to stop. Period. Period.
So listen, there's another story that that broke also, and many of you may have seen it out there, out in Phoenix, Arizona, with this young couple, 22-year-old man, his fiance, she's pregnant, with their 2 daughters in the car. The story goes that they were in a dollar store. A customer, not the store, a customer alleges that the 4-year-old daughter took a doll, called the police. The police found the vehicle. The couple and their children were parked at their housing complex where they live. And the cops, and when you see this video, the aggression these officers had, running, screaming, get out the effing car. I'm going to put a cap in your effing head. And the
wife says she's pregnant. She
well,
yelled.
Well, even before that, again, when they talk about, well, they didn't comply. So the instructions he gave was, put your hands up, get out of the car. Now, if you're in a car, how can you put your hands up and actually get out of a car at the same time? And she's yelling, the door won't open. I don't effing care. I'm going to put a cap in your effing head. Put your hands up. And she says, I have a child in my arms. I don't care. Put your hands up. So when you hear these, and then when you look at what they wrote in their police report, there's a distortion. Now, they don't have body cams activated yet, even though this was a federal guideline that all police departments need to have it. So they haven't installed theirs yet. Their dash cams were not on. And then there's a video clip that shows when they have the young man handcuffed. He's on the floor. They pick him up, push him against the vehicle, and tell him to spread his legs. He spreads his legs. Then the police officer did a sweep. Now, sweep is what they are trained to get them to go low, right? And so they don't put that in the report, but it's real clear there. So there's a lot of dancing around right now by the police in Arizona, but the police commissioner or the commander, she did come out and she said, what you witnessed there is not the way police officers, you should not judge all police officers by what you saw there. That's as close as she came to talking about those officers in there. So they've been taken off of the street, but they're still working. There's a $10 million lawsuit that the family has brought against them. But here's one of those things to change this behavior, right? There's going to be a settlement. I don't care. When you see this, there's going to be a settlement. The settlement comes out of taxpayers' dollars. Yep. So the society in Phoenix should be outraged at
They
this.
should be locked up.
Right. Now,
You're talking about a doll?
that would change.
Right.
That would
All
change
because
their
of a
behavior.
doll.
about from a dollar
dollar.
store.
A 99-cent
From a dollar store.
99
That's
cents.
Wait, hold on.
just-
And
That
just
is
the last
about
point.
terrorism.
Just
That
the
is
last
about
point.
intimidating people of color.
Just the
That's
last-
about that is about intimidating people of color, putting niggers and spics in their place. And I'm done.
So,
take away their ability to frighten and terrorize us.
So here's what I've seen some
Period.
suggestions out there, right? Instead of having taxpayers' dollars go towards it, it should come out of the
their
police
pension.
retirement pension fund
Yep.
to get the other police officers to start being accountable to one another.
Right, and what about what about Weber in Memphis, who was handcuffed and shot 20 times?
Yeah.
At least this family lived to talk about it. He was they had a riot in Memphis.
Yes.
Memphis, the city where Martin Luther King was killed. They had a riot in the 21st century, a half century later, because he was a college student.
But he's also allegedly shot somebody shot someone. So allegedly,
But if
again, the police should not be judge and jury.
And he was handcuffed.
Yeah.
Should you shoot somebody
No.
if they're handcuffed?
No.
Did they shoot Dylan Roof? He killed 9 people. They didn't kill him.
He didn't get shot,
They didn't
right.
shoot him one time.
Right.
Exactly. But listen. I want to go to because I want to get to your announcements. I want to switch to politics real quick because we've been talking about politics for quite a while, and especially dealing with the Democrats and the debate. There's so much politics that happened this week. But I want to talk about the upcoming Democratic debate. It's going to be 2 nights. The first night is going to be Wednesday, June 26th, and the second will be the next night, Thursday, June 27th. The first group will be 10, and the second group will be 10. Jennifer, can you go down the list of the first group and then the second group?
Absolutely. It's the first time you see all these names in one place, and you can go on and on and on and on. So we have New Jersey, U.S. Senator Cory Booker, the first night, along with Massachusetts U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Texas, former Representative Beto O'Rourke, Minnesota's United States Senator Amy Klobuchar, former Representative John Delaney of Maryland, Representative Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, former Housing Secretary Julianne Castro, Representative Tim Ryan of Ohio, New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio, Washington Governor Jay Inslee. That's the first night, Wednesday, June 26th. And the second night, Thursday, June 27th, we'll have Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, California's U.S. Senators Kamala Harris, former Vice President Joe Biden, Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, author Marianne Williamson, California Representative Eric Swalwell, New York State U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, entrepreneur Andrew Yang, and Governor John Hickenlooper of Colorado.
Wow. That's
And I think,
That's
for
a
that
wow.
matter, we'll all be on there too, right?
Exactly.
Why not? You looking for a job?
Right. Like I've said before, right, from a sports perspective, we got March Madness, the 64 teams in their brackets. This is rivaling, the March Madness. This is going to be June craziness with so many folks out there. So it should be interesting. And again, they're going to have to limit them to the amount of time. I just question whether you're going to hear enough quality
You're not.
responses with so many
It's
people
theater.
in
Right.
there, right?
It's all theater.
We have a hard enough time
Exactly.
in here just trying to convey it, right?
And like Barack Obama said, I think the Democrats have to be careful that this doesn't become a circular firing squad, and keep the eyes on the prize, which ultimately is defeating Donald Trump. And, all these candidates will weed themselves out. And to be honest, I've listened to most of them. They've, all been on the various shows. And for the most part, each of them have policies and positions I think that the American people can relate to, particularly people who are progressive and just want fairness and equality. Unfortunately, as Bobby said, everyone is not going to be heard. And you may have one or two that may emerge out of this and rise up and be one of the top contenders to rival, Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and of course Biden. But I think that we're going to see those who are right now the front runners remain the front runners. And again, they have to be careful not to cannibalize each other, not to engage in a circular firing squad, and to know that ultimately the goal is to remove this man from
Let me ask you
office.
this, Jamie. I mean, this is something that I keep trying to figure out. Is this that you got these many people because they think that this is as best a time as any, meaning that they think, Trump, if enough people come out, Trump will be gone, and so this is it's my competition is not as great as it otherwise would be. So let me step in right now, or do they really think I am the one? You get what I'm saying?
I think Bobby should answer that question, but I do agree, Jennifer. Yes.
Yeah, I think, they took a playbook from what happened in 2016 because there was no strong Republican candidate, which allowed this, this reality TV con person to do what they do. There's no strong Democrat coming in there. So now they're saying for political purposes to say, let me put my name out there. I've seen what happens. Even if I lose, I can raise my profile, right? And I think that actually goes back to Barack Obama, right? Because they saw he came out of nowhere before he actually decided to run for president, and he actually made it. So I think it has created a path for individuals who have strong political aspirations to say, hey, why not me?
There you go. I want to say this, and to two of our listeners. First of all, thank you to Bebe Rodriguez, who answered my question in a sense about the parents of those kids that killed Junior, and said that no, the parents of the children that did this, that no, there was nothing said about this horrific crime. I appreciate that. Anthony Long says, coming off of the debate, that the candidates should bring up reparations, and I piggyback off of this, and I want to come to you, Larry Ham, because you have a event that's dealing with reparations. Well, this coming Wednesday, Capitol Hill, there will be a House slavery reparation hearing. Yep. Danny Glover and others will be there to speak about reparations. Where do you think, and I'll start off with you, Larry, where do you think we are headed with this hearing on reparations? And after we have this go around, I want you to mention your two events, especially one dealing with reparations.
The hearing is going to be on H.R. 40, which was a bill that was introduced for many years by Congressman John Conyers. Conyers has since retired from Congress because of a situation that he was in. And now that committee is being chaired by Sheila Jackson Lee. And this is going to be the first hearing on H.R. 40 in about 10 years. I believe I was actually at that session of Congress 10 years ago when the other hearing was held. But as you said, Danny Glover, who has weighed in mightily on the issue of reparations over the years, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who wrote a number of things on reparations, and others. As a matter of fact, we were trying to send someone from our organization to testify, but they told us that there's so many people coming to testify that they're not accepting any more speakers for that hearing. So this is a good thing.
Hey, Larry, I'm just curious, what's your definition of reparations, right? Because most people, when they hear it, they immediately go to, Webster's dictionary that has this monetary piece to it. How do you define reparations?
Can I add to that? Also define it, but in what form do you think it is plausible, logical, and doable?
Oh boy.
How much time we got?
That's right. Well, I'm gonna give a short answer. First of all, the root of reparations is repair. It's repair for the enslavement of our people in this country. Chattel slavery existed for 245 years. And then the concomitant systems that came out of enslavement, which was Jim Crow segregation and all the other forms of racial discrimination. So it's not just for slavery. Black people were damaged during Jim Crow, which was re-enslavement in the early period. So it's repair. Let me say this, since we're going to have the Juneteenth celebration. Is Wednesday is Juneteenth. That's when the Union soldiers came into Galveston in 1865, in June of 1865, and informed people there that they were free. That's actually not the formal end of slavery. Slavery ends with the passage of the 13th Amendment, but there's a Juneteenth holiday. So reparations has its origins in the fact that people knew that you couldn't just free black people. You couldn't give them freedom to want, that there had to be some recompense for what had been done. So there was a plan to distribute land to the formerly enslaved. First, General Sherman issues General Order Number 15. Sherman expropriated 400,000 acres of land from slave masters and gave it to slaves. Out of that came H.R. 29, sponsored by Thaddeus Stevens, which said that the formerly enslaved or their survivors, if they fought in the Civil War, would receive 40 acres and $50. That bill was passed by both houses of Congress. A version of it was passed in the Senate. But what happened, Lincoln was assassinated. Andrew Johnson, who was from Tennessee and whose sympathies, even though he was the Union, he was sympathized with the South, he not only vetoed H.R. 29, he gave orders to take back the land that had actually been given enslaved people. You know, we actually got some land.
Right.
You know, so they
And that's what led to the Homestead Act.
That's right. That's right. So H.R. 40 is an effort to revitalize the issue of reparations. Now, that bill calls for the establishment of a study commission. It doesn't call for reparations. Right. It is to study the issue and to make recommendations to Congress as to how reparations should be made. You know, should it be land? Mm-hmm. Should it be money? Should whatever. They're supposed to make recommendations. So I think the most logical way forward on the issue of reparations is to get H.R. 40 passed, because that makes a path to some type of actual action, because everything else is going to be discussion. Right. Because we don't have the power to force anything until that commission is set up.
Okay, now you have you mentioned
Yes.
the Juneteenth, but what about the reparations?
Yes. The People's Organization for Progress, since we were founded in 1983, we have supported and called for reparations. We will be having our annual reparations march and rally on Saturday, June 22nd, 12 o'clock noon. We're gathering at the Lincoln Monument in Newark, New Jersey, and we're going to march through downtown Newark for reparations and address the issue. I'm happy to say last year we got our congressman from the 10th District, Donald Payne Jr., we got him to attend the rally, and consequently, he's become a co-sponsor on H.R. 40. And my position is this, that all the black legislators, and shouldn't just be black ones, but all the black and progressive legislators in Congress should be co-sponsors of that bill. And I will say this, although I'm not supporting Cory Booker, I commend him for introducing Senate Bill 1083, which is the Senate companion bill to H.R. 40, because it can't become law unless it's passed in both houses of Congress.
I just want to move on, and before I go to Bobby and Jamie, because not only with the basketball NBA championship, we had a blockbuster trade. I do want to mention something that we talked about last week. We zeroed our attention more on Linda Fairstein and the situation dealing with the Central Park Five and the fallout since the Netflix When They See Us film that came out. Well, Elizabeth Lederer, who basically was the head prosecutor during the Central Park Five case, she basically resigned her position at Columbia Law School. Now, we give kudos to those black law students. Now, before the Netflix, they circulated a petition. It didn't get off the ground, but they were on the case. And then when the Netflix piece came out, it gained more momentum. And the letter said in a statement, given the nature of the recent publicity generated by the Netflix portrayal of the Central Park case, it is best for me not to renew my teaching application.
And Fatine, in her op-ed, Wall Street Journal op-ed, Fairstein is still stating
Yes.
that these young men committed a crime. Even
Yes.
if they can't be connected or exonerated of rape, they still committed a crime that night because there were 10 people or 10 other incidents of assault in the park. So she still can't bring herself to say that these young men are innocent. I made an error. You know, it's just, it's unfathomable.
She's not recognizing
That-
the jury verdict.
Yeah, it's just this complete disconnect, not even recognizing the
And
verdict.
the president, by making the same type of statement, I just think it just fuels her to continue her warped, opinion. And this shows that racism or whatever ism it is that
absolutely.
she's dealing with, this shows how it is and what we have to deal with.
If there is a hell, there will be a special place for her.
It won't be hot enough for her. All right, I want to turn to our sports brothers because most of the times we're rushing. I don't want the brothers to rush through this. Talk a little bit about the NBA championship, what happened, was expected. The New York Knicks name comes up because of KD, and of course the blockbuster trade, and what is expected because we have a draft coming up.
Congratulations to the Toronto Raptors. They played against a team, the Golden State Warriors, that was clearly undermanned. I mean, Kevin Durant, arguably the best player in the world, pretty much out for the entire series, came back, one game towards Achilles. Now he'll be out for most, if not all, of next season. Klay Thompson, in my opinion, the most underrated player in the NBA.
Whoa.
A future Hall of Famer, one of the great players, in my opinion, of this generation. He tears his ACL late in Game 6. He'll be out all next season. So this is unprecedented. And both of those guys are free agents, meaning that they were going to be out there seeking contracts, if not from their current team, Golden State, other teams. I mean, there were going to be many suitors for them. So it's unfortunate. So first of all, prayers for Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson. Hope these brothers recover. But again, Toronto won. I think it was great for Canada. I think Kawhi Leonard, again, you could put him in an argument as the greatest player in the world. A young man who represents himself, represents the game of basketball so well. So just happy for them, but also looking at it from a standpoint of Golden State, you have to feel for them, given all the adversity and what they went through.
Yeah, in Toronto, there's people saying, well, because of the injuries that Golden State had, they should have an asterisk next to it. That's nonsense, right? Golden State played, when you look about the teams they beat, right? They beat Philadelphia in a Game 7, a shot that Kawhi hit that bounced around before it went in. They beat Milwaukee, who had the best record. They dusted them off, and they went and they won. They beat Golden State. Not only did they beat them in Golden State. They won 3 games on Golden State's home court. So kudos to Canada. Drake, he's now all happy and things of that nature. But there was an incident that took place after that game that is, again, an indication of some of the racism that we have. So the general manager of the Toronto Raptors. The president,
and
sorry.
GM,
President and
GM,
General Manager Masai Ujiri is coming down to get on the court to celebrate with the team. He has his press credential in his hand, not around his neck, which, by the way, is common at those events. He's coming down, and the local sheriff's department stopped him. They basically carded him. And he's like, no, I'm so-and-so. And they're like, you're not getting on the court. And so some pushing and jostling goes by. They try to rush him. personnel from Golden State and Toronto intervened to calm him down. Kyle Lowry of the Raptors, he sees what's going on. He runs over and he pulls Masai onto the court, gives him a hug. Now, the backstory there is Kyle Lowry and Masai did not have a good relationship coming into the season because Kyle felt that Masai was not honest with him because he had traded DeMar DeRozan. And so they had not talked much. So to see that moment where he put it all aside, grabbed his present. So I can tell you, being in arenas, I know what happens at Madison Square Garden. I know what happens at Barclays. I know what happens at Staples Center. When they have big events, the local security in the arena, they are presented pictures of all the VIPs.
Wow.
Every VIP who's supposed to be in there, they are given a picture, and they sit there and they have to memorize it, have the paper in their pockets, pull it out just in case. They also have NBA security that is there as well, and they know who's who. The last group that's informed of there are local police, and they tend not to have local police on the court. Why the sheriff's department was on the court, and then they went and said they were assaulted, and they're seeking to press charges against him.
Wow.
Insane.
That's crazy.
Tell the audience what is the racial dimension of this?
He's African.
He's African.
You didn't say that. Say it again.
He is African man. He is as dark as you can be.
The owner.
The
He's
president
the
and
president
the general
of the
manager.
Toronto Raptors.
Right. The president, general manager. Black man coming down in the stands in a suit. Now, would they have stopped someone who was not of his persuasion? Probably. They would have taken him at their word. But he had his credentials in his hand.
Isn't that something? And when we go to these games, when we have those credentials, they are supposed to be respected.
Oh, and it's happened to me many times. I remember when I was covering the Yankees. I'm there every day. My credential is as clear as, with my picture on it. And I'll never forget this. This was the mid-2000s. It was playoff. I would get stopped going into the locker room. So finally I said, you see me all the time, every day. Why are you stopping me and you're letting everyone else walk in? It was clearly
Was this
an
under Rick
issue of
Cerrone?
color.
This wasn't under Rick
So I
Cerrone.
did talk to Rick. Yes.
yeah,
So it was
okay.
under Rick Cerrone, who was a former head of the Yankee PR. Great guy. Love
Great
Rick.
guy, yes.
I talked to Rick. I said, why is this guy stopping me, Rick? Every time I come in, he's letting everyone go in, and he sees me all the time. Yeah. And so there is a racial element to that sometimes.
Right, and it's not just, we got to remember, it's not just, we don't recognize you. Sometimes the racial element is we want to try to exert a little bit of power over you, right? We want to try to make you feel
Yes.
that, right?
Yes.
We don't want to give you this moment. So maybe in this case, they knew who he was. They just didn't want to.
Yeah, which would be
There
foul.
you go,
So I know we're up,
absolutely.
I know we're up against the clock.
Yes, I wanna
So
get-
just two things, right? Before I get to the reported Laker trade, the Women's World Cup soccer is going on. The United States women are they're favored to possibly win this one. They are going strong. Listen, I support them. I encourage everyone to watch them. They are so much better than the men. And the reason I bring this up is there is a case going on right now about pay equity.
Yep.
Right? They are the number one case in front of the federal courts right now to talk about pay inequity. And they have all the credentials that talk about that would say they outperform. They've had the longest. So if you want to pay based on performance, they have it. Men have not done anything compared to what the women are. They are on a roll out there. So I support the U.S. women's soccer team on the field and off the field.
And let me add to this. That happened with the Jamaican women's soccer team where Rita Marley, the daughter of Bob Marley, had to raise money, and the women's soccer team, again, was as successful or more successful than the
men's, right?
And so the government, they were not funding the women's team. It was disbanded. And so she raised money, got the team, and they're playing in the World Cup. But it is certainly inequity, as Bobby pointed out.
It's outrageous.
Not just, in soccer, but across the board. Now, and the women.
Across the board, not just sports.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
across not just sports, absolutely.
There you go.
Well, unless you're Oprah.
There you go. So I just, Bobby, with the blockbuster trade, I want you to explain that, but I also want you, when you mentioned about KD, the whole thing about coming to the Knicks, is that up in the air?
So here's the speculation throughout the year, and this is just where people put headlines out there, in my opinion, to bring attention to themselves or to get clicks on whatever websites and blogs they have, right? So the narrative for the Knicks all year was they are intentionally trying to lose games. That's not true. Professional teams don't intentionally try to lose games. Those guys are prideful. They want to play. So there's no tanking. But people said, oh, they should tank because that'll get them in a good position to get the #1 pick, which they didn't get, and that KD would sign. So there's, no one knows other than KD where he's going to sign. So we'll find that out in the next couple of weeks where he decides when free agency opens up where he'll sign, right? As Jamie pointed out, with him being injured, however, if he does sign with the Knicks, he will not play until 2021, most likely, because it's going to take that long for him to heal on his Achilles. They talk about Kyrie Irving coming to the Knicks, and now it looks like he may end up in Brooklyn out there. So, there's all this speculation, or I don't think he's going to LA, but who knows, right? Only Kyrie knows where he's going to go. So the Lakers reportedly made a trade with the New Orleans Pelicans to get Anthony Davis. And in return, they're sending Alonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, and 3 #1 picks spread over the next 7 years, which that's a lot for one player who, by the way, has not come out publicly to say that he will resign. He has 1 year left on his deal, so he can get traded, play on his existing contract, and then next year go into free agency. So hopefully the Lakers have a wink-wink deal that when he comes, he's going to sign, because if he doesn't and he decides to leave, then they gave away a lot for 1 year. Now, his agent is also a childhood friend and the agent of LeBron James, so you would like to suspect they have something going on in there.
I don't think they suspect he's going to resign. He'll be a Laker. And, Las Vegas, who rarely gets it wrong, they've already installed the Lakers as the favorites to win the NBA championship next year.
There you go.
So they're fully confident that AD will be there and he'll be there long term.
There you go. Well, we are out of town. We extended a few minutes to go past an hour, but I try to keep it there. Good conversation, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you
Thanks
all,
for having
gentlemen, on Father's Day, of taking the time to take the time out to be here today. And for me, just to say to everybody, just be better than you were yesterday and make a difference in someone's life.
Right, and thank you for tuning in. Keep your mind right, as Bob used to say, and he used to always say, keep a good thought.
God bless.
God bless.